Hello and welcome to Not Even Mad, the talk show where we unite people with disparate political passions. They don't have to be right or left. They just have to disagree with each other, come from different points of view, but love talking to each other more than they love hating each other or the other side, whatever side that may be. Today, we talk about the fact that the government is open. Yay! But that also means it's open season on Chuck Schumer. This leads to a lot of questions like, what are the Democrats doing? What can the Democrats do? What do the Democrats stand for? We will discuss it while upholding our reputation for refutation, and yet at the same time, always showing that we are not even mad. We have today the editor-at-large of Reason Magazine, Nick Gillespie, is here. Hello, Nick, and also the host of the Reason Interview podcast. I believe I got that right.
You did, Mike. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
I'm a former guest. Now, I've not been a guest on Anthony Weiner's New York radio show. It's on pause because Mr. Weiner is running for New York City Council, District 2, but he joins me now. Hi, welcome to Not Even Mad. Where is District Council 2?
It's Lower Manhattan, from about Houston Street to the 30s, from the water to about 6th Avenue. It's all the iconic parks, Tompkins Square Park, Union Square Park, Washington Square Park. It's nice to be with you, Nick and I. Great
to have you. How's the polling? Can you even poll in a district that small?
It's not prudent to do so. It's probably more expensive to poll. And polling, in my case, is hard to do because I'm like a sui generis candidate. You'd have to do like four pages of Wikipedia entries before you ask them the question. But there isn't any polling.
Name recognition, not a problem, though, I assume.
Apparently not, no.
So name recognition, or the recognition of the fact that we have a government, it is being funded, and that was not always a certain thing, because Chuck Schumer, as a Senate Democrat, did have the option to filibuster what was called a continuing resolution. And many members of his party, many members on the left, urged him, pleaded with him to do it, but he made the case that it would be hurting his constituency and the American people more than it would help, even if it was, quote unquote, standing up to the Trump administration. Now Schumer is taking the brickbats, but I guess we could all go to Yellowstone Park if we need it. Now, Anthony, you've run for many a position. I'm forgetting, did you ever run for New York Senate?
No, many positions. I said, I got elected to the council, then elected to Congress. I ran for mayor twice. That's the only thing that I ran for. I didn't win.
But your name was
that's four more than I have. So, and Mike, I know you are a perennial candidate for every office. But
I was the vice president of the Interfraternity Council in college. But here's my question: if you were the senior senator, junior senator from New York, and both New York senators actually voted to fund the government, what would you have done? Would you have been a yes vote on the continuing resolution?
Well, it's important to understand that, in a way, everyone in this transaction played their part. I mean, members of the House of Representatives, and I was a member of Congress for some time, you're not really accountable for anything, right? I mean, you're very rarely the person that means something is going to get passed. And you can always rationalize a reason you didn't vote for something. It didn't have enough of funding for something, or it had too much funding, or it had this rider or not. Being a member of Congress is the opposite of really being accountable, except to the idea that you've got to know where your constituents are. You don't want to make them too bad. And to a large degree, that's true in the Senate as well, except for rare moments when you have these kind of precipices that we face. Continuing resolutions, which are fancy ways of saying, are we going to keep the government open even though we haven't passed all the appropriation bills? Raising the debt limit, these things that kind of really do need adults to try to figure out. Well, Chuck Schumer was put in the position of kind of being the last remaining adult that had to not figure out the way to perform what he felt, but try to think what was in the best interest. And as I've kind of watched...
Of who?
Excuse me?
You say in the best interest.
Well, as I've been trying to figure out this question, like, what would I have done? One of the ways I'm looking at it is I'm listening to Chuck's explanation of his view, and I don't hear anyone on the other side really disputing it on the substance. There's a lot of disputing it on the performative value of what Democrats want to see right now. And I am a I am a perfect barometer of this. I've been knocking on doors for the last couple of months here in a deep blue, very Democratic area. And the vibe changed from everyone being under their table, kind of like shell-shocked, to being, why aren't we doing more to fight? But when Chuck Schumer says, well, yes, we could have helped shut down the government, that would have been a way to fight and way to demonstrate to our base we were fighting. The question he raises, I haven't seen any of those advocates really answer, which would we have been in a better place as Democrats and as a country if the government did shut down? And what's unusual about this, and I'd be interested to hear what Nick's take on this, is usually when you reach these precipices, there is usually some incentive, a lot of incentive on the in-party, particularly the president, to try not to shut down the government. Well, what if you have this Alice in Wonderland dynamic that actually the president, he doesn't give a shit. He's like, yeah, let's go ahead and shut this down because he's just the guy at the end of the bar shouting at his TV is now the president. And I do think that Chuck Schumer might have made the right calculation that stopping Donald Trump from having a shutdown government was the right play in the end of the day.
I, too, am interested in Nick's opinion.
Yeah.
Now, Alice in Wonderland because of the Red Queen off with their heads or because of the...
Jabberwock.
Because of the heavy drug references and allusions of that, Mike?
Well, even the contortion of language.
No, let me...
the thing is what I want it to mean in telling a Ravens from a writing desk. But go ahead.
To talk about this, like, I'm pissed that there was a continuing resolution, which wasn't Donald Trump and the Republicans' interests, because... Trump understands from his own previous experience that, like, he's going to get tagged with any kind of government shutdown. But I don't care. I'm not a Republican. I'm not a Democrat. And the only two people I think who acquitted themselves with honor this time around were Rand Paul and Thomas Massie. They were the lone Republicans who voted against in the Senate and the House the continuing resolution. If there were actual adults in the room, we would not be debating the budget for this fiscal year with like 6 months to go in it. The Senate or the federal government has not passed a budget according to the processes that they put into law in the 70s. They have not managed to pass a year before the fiscal year it governs since the 1990s. That is a sign that the classroom doesn't have a teacher in it. There's no adults here. Regardless of, then you get to the question, okay, well, what should Chuck Schumer have done or not? From a viewpoint, whether or not you want to spend a lot of money or a little money, whatever your scope of government is, like there needs to be a serious discussion of, okay, what is the framework for how we're going to spend money, what we're going to spend it on, and how do we talk about that so that we're not just constantly doing more of the same. And the only alternative to this is, looking up in 2019, right, the last year before COVID, the federal government spent $4.4 trillion. In 2025, it's estimated that we're going to spend $7.2 trillion, okay? There's a massive jackup during COVID. It has gotten even higher than we were spending at peak COVID. This is a real problem. And what I fault Chuck Schumer for many, many things. I'm not a fan of him as a politician, whatnot, but he is the opposition in the Senate. He could have at least extracted some agreement to have an actual discussion of what do we spend money on and why.
Well, he was your political mentor, as I understand it, Anthony. So two questions. One, could he have really done that? I saw that in the couple days that he was considering what to do, there was some talk of that, but it became clear that the Republicans were not going to move and concessions were not to be extracted. But if you could, just take me through the politics of outrage, because I know that at this moment, Democrats are saying do something, but is that always the smartest thing to do if the something that you do is either ineffective or hurts people? Then again, it has to be weighed against the idea, the popular opinion that you're doing nothing. And that, too, has costs, even if it's a perception. But go ahead.
Yeah, that's basically, you said it similar to the way I said it. Look, there are a lot of people in Washington right now. One of the impressions that I got when I first got there in the 1980s was that a relatively few number of members of Congress are actually doing the job of running the government. Everyone else is doing some version of trying to get reelected, performing the minimal amounts so that their constituents, are providing good services back home. But in terms of running the government, it's a relatively small number of people, the committee chairman, the leadership, and things like that. In today's Congress, it's even fewer because you now have the entire Republican Party, which has said, we're not even going to insist on our prerogatives. We're going to let the president do whatever he wants. And when Nick says he should have extracted something, well, that's a common refrain I've heard the last few days. Using what leverage? If the precipice doesn't exist for Elon Musk, do you think Elon Musk, here's a simple way to put this. Do you think Elon Musk was rooting for a shutdown or rooting for not a shutdown? The fact is that if we hadn't really ever contemplated this.
And the answer, obviously, he was, because he could go nuts with his cuts.
No, he's not. He wasn't. The Republican Party was in favor of a continuing resolution. That's what Mike Johnson did, and that's what happened in the Senate. So listen, it's like,
forgive me, Nick. I'm just saying that the two options that were available, neither one of them were good for Democrats. They were what Chuck Schumer chose, a continuing resolution, or a shutdown. And you said he should have used his leverage. Well, what do you do when the leverage is you don't want either one of those two things? There's nothing to really bargain with. But in terms of Mike, you put the question correctly, because this is what's going on in Washington in full display. Citizens who are in the Democratic Party are furious at their leaders for not doing something, right? And so there is no shortage in today's world of people who perform outrage, being mad, a lot better than Chuck Schumer does. But when you're reached at the point where you have to say, all right, what if we do have a situation where the guy that wrote the Project 2025 book is in charge of OMB, and that guy is empowered by present law to say what opens and when, that's a pretty bad scenario that we haven't confronted before. And that's why I think Chuck Schumer, I haven't heard anyone dispute this, why Chuck Schumer might have chose the least bad of two bad options.
I just want to stress that we're acting as if all of this is a surprise. Like, who knew that the budget resolution, the past continuing resolutions that hadn't been passed, they're coming due, and nobody knew. This is not, it's not going to be about showdowns, but like nothing is going to change. And again, I actually think, Anthony, I get your point about Democrats being outraged because they want to know that there's some kind of resistance to Trump going on. But by the same token, it's like if we're spending, $7.2 trillion this year, it's like there's going to be a lot of money, and there's going to be a lot of money for everybody because DOGE is not actually cutting spending. And the spigot is still flowing. And for me, as somebody who's not a partisan of either group, that's what's outraging me, is that we are not discussing the fact that, whatever you want to say, how much more the government should have been spending under COVID, it's like COVID is over and there is no reason for us to be spending, basically $3 trillion more a year than we were pre-COVID.
Yeah, but Nick, I have to tell you, man, 2012 called, they want their debate back. We're not having these kinds of...
But then where's the leadership in the sense of like, if you're saying that Schumer couldn't have worked with, there are no Republicans in the Senate, and there's enough people in the Senate, there's, like Murkowski and other people that you could tease into something.
Go ahead.
It's never easy.
Go ahead. I'll do the math with you. You tell me who these Republicans that are magically going to start saying to the bill that Donald Trump said he wants to get passed, and the House of Representatives passes and goes home. I don't see a heck of a lot of leverage, but I just want to say to this, but hold on, let me just finish my thought. Listen, I will say this, this whole idea we're passing continuing resolutions, we're not doing appropriation bills. I love conversations like this because it reminds me about what Washington used to be like. We had rational conversations about process, dollars and cents, we didn't have whether we're going to allow the executive branch, we're going to write into a CR giving the executive branch legislative authority over, this is madness. So you say, I wish you would. Listen, nobody knows more about exerting leverage than Chuck Schumer does. If he had 5 or 6 Republicans to work with, we would not be doing the podcast about this right now. We'd do March Madness or something else. He didn't. Let's assume for a moment, for the purpose of this conversation, he didn't have 5 or 6 Republicans. Okay, then what do you do? And I think your answer, Nick, is you'd probably do what he did.
I don't know that he would have done otherwise. So You know,
Let me say a couple things. He couldn't extract concessions, but one of the most poisonous of the pills in the original proposal was to take $1 billion worth of funding out of D.C. Now, we're New Yorkers. If we were Washingtonians, we would be outraged at that. And it does seem, thanks to the efforts of Susan Collins and others, it does seem that that has been taken off the table. I don't know if you credit Schumer, but the direness of this particular proposal has been made a bit less dire. Also, I do want to ask you this, Anthony. When you said 2012 called, they want their debate back. 2012 called, I would take and sign up for the debt of 2012, which was $16 trillion, and it's now $36 trillion. So of the serious adults who actually care about running the government, does the debt matter to them? Does it matter to you? It matters to Nick a lot. It matters to me. I think it's a big problem, actually. Just servicing the debt robs us of other ability to pay for things. But where are we on the seriousness of the debt as an issue?
Well, I think it's serious is that we've had a wealth transfer from government to rich people. And I think that's a serious problem. I think that is a problem. And I do think that eventually the math stops working forever repaying the debt. I think it's reasonable. But I do think that we also have a scenario, and we're learning this now as Doge and Trump does this somewhat valuable exercise of kind of making us rethink all of these different levels of government and kind of what they're all doing.
Right.
I think there's actually some rhetorical value of that in making Democrats stand up and say, yeah, one of the reasons we have USAID is so we don't have more immigration, like stuff like that. It's good for us to have African babies not die. That's actually good for us. But in terms of your concern about the debt, I am relatively concerned about the debt, but I am more concerned about where is that transfer of wealth from the government going to. It ain't going to my constituents. It's going to very, very, very wealthy people. And I am perfectly down for a debate about how we tackle that problem.
Well, everyone's always more concerned about, even if they're concerned about the debt or concerned about waste, fraud, and abuse, they're always concerned more about something that takes precedence that dictates we'll never really tackle waste, fraud, and abuse.
Well, hold on a second. You're conflating debt with waste, fraud, and abuse.
No, I'm making the point that these are analogous situations insofar as even fair-minded Democrats can say, well, yeah, the situation isn't perfect, but they'll never, given the incentives and given short-termism over long-termism, they'll never do anything to stop it. I don't think Doge is the answer.
That's bullshit. That's bullshit. No, wait a minute. We Democrats believe in giving people resources in order to take care of their health, to take care of their housing, and to feed their children. Yes, we do believe
Obamacare,
that. Okay,
was Obamacare paid for? No, I mean, like both parties.
Obamacare was a plan. Obamacare was to stop it. Obamacare was a plan that took something that was growing by 30% and changed it to something growing by 8%. Yes, that's
it.
A
Also
success.
didn't pay for itself, even in its rosiest scenarios.
Your sanitation collection doesn't pay for itself either, knucklehead. Yes, of course it didn't pay for it. Am I allowed to say that on a show called I Don't Hate You or whatever?
Yeah, I don't know.
We seek to have comity, and
forgive me.
Branded
By the
that's
way,
quite all right. Knucklehead away. But what I'm saying is, the debt is a bipartisan problem, and Trump, Mike, to go back to your original question, Trump doesn't care about debt. I mean, he thrives on it. He added something like $7.8 trillion in his first term. A majority of that came before COVID spending. He does not care about debt. At this point, nobody in the Democratic Party is saying, you know what, we need to have a balanced budget. Nobody is saying that. They'll say we need to sock it to wealthy people, many of whom live in Anthony's, possibly the district you'll be representing in city council, because New Yorkers are generally wealthier than most people in the country anyway. And there's a lot of rich people in the East Village, but, neither party cares. And we're probably not going to visit this issue until the early 2030s. When Social Security and Medicare really start to go.
No, we're going to visit it immediately because he wants to extend the tax cut. That's one of the things that's in the CR is they authorized him to blow another $4 trillion in the debt. And you say it's a bipartisan thing. Not so much. I mean, yes, there are people that are getting. All right, well, let me finish my. Right, let me just kind of rebut the point. I heard what your point was. You have people getting services that cost money. Healthcare, by and large, is not a profit-making industry. When someone gets a ruptured kidney, they're not shopping around to see if they can get a spleen. They go get their kidney taken care of. However, when we decide to take money from the government, from the resources of government, and give it more and more and more to very wealthy people, that is, I'm sorry to say it, a Republican problem.
The way that the tax code has been written as it's developed over the past 20 years, and I recommend people check out Jessica Riedel's work on this, we have the most progressive tax system in the OECD among advanced economies where the wealthiest people pay by far the largest amount of taxes that go into the thing. But I'm not even talking about that. Just, start from Bush, George W. Bush, and go through this. Republicans and Democratic administrations, Republican and Democratic Congresses, the debt keeps growing. It's a bipartisan problem. And it's because government politicians don't want to force their constituents to pay for the government that they say. We have a government by Groupon, where we're lucky if we're covering 70 cents on the dollar that government's spending. And so people are like, yeah, you know what? If I can get $1 worth of government stuff for like 70 cents, yeah, I'll take more. I'll buy more.
Yeah, I mean, listen, by the way, and I mean this seriously, I enjoy having a conversation like this because they're so rare. They don't go on anymore. This is a little bit of a relic of what may be a CR debate, which is continuing resolution. I wish Chuck Schumer wouldn't keep saying CR. This is what a debate might be looking like, but it's not looking like this. We have this, Nick, the Republican Party is a wholly owned subsidiary of these moneyed interests that are taking more and more of the money. If you want to start with Bush, you can go even further back than that. And we had a far more progressive, about twice as more progressive a tax code during the Eisenhower administration.
Yeah, that's
and we had
not
a middle
really
class
true.
then.
If you think that anybody during the Eisenhower administration were paying the top marginal rates as listed, but I think this is beside the point. I mean, we have a budgeting problem. And fundamentally, I realize you want to say, well, we can't do anything, Anthony, because, Trump is running everything and he has the Republican Party in tow. And what can the Democrats do? But I don't know. Maybe this is what leadership and opposition is about. Build a coalition. I think people are like, oh, we can't work across the aisles anymore because we're so polarized. It doesn't even appear to happen. I mean, if you would have had, Collins, Murkowski and Rand Paul, that's 3. If you needed 5 senators, that's 3 Republicans who would have voted for something other than just a blank CR with a little bit of coddling. I'm sure you can find 2 more people in the Republican coalition, that would have stood up.
I think Nick Gillespie is a better vote counter in the Senate than Chuck Schumer is. But let me can I return this to return this to a meta conversation for a moment, Mike, because I know you're a big thought podcast guy.
Go ahead.
We have a structural problem here in that when our system of government was created, we were very concerned about the passions of the people running too hot and leading us to do stuff. So lots of stops were put into the system, right? And you can argue the 2-year term, the cooling saucer of the Senate and everything else. Starting about the time I was in Congress, though, when
did you start?
I served from 99 to 2011. When I'm surprised you didn't commit that to memory.
I have forgotten.
That was the golden age. The golden age of the Democrats in Congress.
Those are the years he's blacked out entirely.
But let me just make this point that starting with the Tea Party, they weren't. Maybe it happened before, on and off. We began having people come to Washington who says, I don't have things I want to do. I only have this overall ethos of I'm going to do everything I can to stop things from happening. We never quite contemplated how easy that was to do because of all the stops that we put into government. Now we're seeing today that it really is relatively easy for a relatively small number of people to stop stuff from happening. So you say, well, we only need a few people to get us over the hump. I argue the other way. We have so many people now that are deeply invested in kind of a form of governmental anarchy that not only is Doge there, but you have actual Republicans saying, I ran for office and I'm totally fine outsourcing my job to that dude. And that's a very different environment. And you can say Chuck Schumer hasn't managed it well. You can say we should be more angry or more pissed off. But I'm not sure that a vote on a CR is necessarily the same thing that a vote on the CR was.
It's a weird system with a lot of fail stops in place and everything that goes from spending. Bill Clinton's last budget was under $2 trillion, not adjusted for inflation, and we're spending $7.2 trillion now. So somehow the government keeps growing, even if people are stopping it. We've had a couple of shutdowns, minor shutdowns. That doesn't actually stop government spending. To go back, Anthony, to engage on that larger question of like, we need to have, a discussion about governance. What is the role of government? What is the essential role of government? And then what are the things that we need to be cutting? Because we're not going to be able to spend our way into budget surpluses. We're not going to be able to spend our way into economic growth or anything like that.
Yeah, I think you're right. And let me just put a cherry on top of the debt discussion. I apologize, Mike. Yeah. Look, you're right. Okay. However, debt and the danger that it creates and the pressure it puts on interest rates or whatever else notwithstanding, Mrs. Krapalucci in my district who stops me on the street is generally not saying, here's the thing I want government to do. It's real in that debt. No, generally what they're saying is I want government to do certain things for me, provide for my health care, make sure I'm safe on the streets and things like that. So I am with you. I just believe that we've always had this problem that debt in and of itself is not an animating issue.
That is true.
And I think that that's both structural and also a reflection of the idea that there are people who believe there, even people who are pretty smart, not like the three of us, who say, you know what? This is an imaginary problem. We're going to keep printing the paper. The Chinese are going to keep buying it, and we all go on our merry way.
Yeah, the Chinese stopped buying our debt, and they're not even the largest foreign owner of our debt. To your point, one of the things that was amazing about the 90s is that in the wake of the end of the Cold War in particular, both leaders in the Republican and Democratic Party talked seriously about changing what government spent money on. And there was a peace dividend as a percentage of GDP, defense spending came way down and things like that. And we actually managed, despite, real enmity between the Republicans and the Democrats, Newt Gingrich and Bill Clinton, we actually approached, a basic budget surplus or equality.
Yes.
And that was an ideological decision because people were talking about this stuff and building a consensus for the idea that this mattered and it needed to be addressed. And that's completely gone out the window.
And I don't know if Mrs. Krapalucci or even the little Krapalucci's give a crap about the debt, but I do know that right now we pay about $870 billion on interest. We pay more to service the debt than we do on the military. I don't know how many people know that. The military might not be popular. It usually comes in as a hobby horse for many a left-leaning Democrat to say we're spending too much on the military. Well, at least the military gives us planes and jobs for servicemen. Servicing the debt doesn't do that. And when the debt...
It is horrifying, Mike, that you said that what the military really does is a jobs program.
Well, it's very good.
The military, it's a defense department. It should be here to defend. We spend too much on defense. We spend too much on debt service.
I like the F-22. I think it costs way too much. But I'm just trying to articulate, even a big critic of the military would say, well, we get something for that. Many people have a living based on the military. I think we also have defense based on the military. We get nothing for servicing the debt. I don't know when the conception is going to change, but as the numbers change and we're headed towards something of a cliff with people paying into Social Security and not getting something out, I think in about 8 years, that's going to be upended.
All right, now, Mike, you're starting to swerve here. First of all, let me just say, when you say that we don't get anything for paying interest on the debt, yes, it's government tax dollars that go to wealthy people that bought T-bills. So for one thing, yes,
well, it also goes to retired teachers.
Not so many. I know I've heard that line before.
Group that buys
for the most part, the American people are less and less invested in equities and bonds and things like that than ever would. It's more and more concentrated than it's ever before. Next, this whole idea that Social Security is not going to have money to pay out. No, it's at a certain point, it's not. It's going to stop having its surplus, and that some of the money that is going to go directly from workers, it's going to go. And I got to tell you something. We've been hearing forever. We've been. I know, but that number keeps moving outwards because guess what's happening? We are having babies and they're going into the workforce, so more people are producing wealth.
It's not going outward. It's somewhere in the range in the early 2030s. And when the Social Security surplus is gone by legislative decree, Social Security can't pay out more than it brings in,
which is 75%.
benefits will be cut by 25%.
That's not true. What'll happen is they'll tweak the program. I understand.
Well, it is
tweak the
true
program.
unless they
So,
change
and
it.
they'll
But it's
tweak
not going to
the
be zero.
program
Mike
by
made
taking more debt.
No, Mike made the mistake of saying that we're going to be out of money in 32. No, we're going to take in 75% instead of having 100% of it come from the trust fund. Yeah, Social Security has worked exactly how it was designed since it was designed in the 1930s. And since the 1930s, people like Nick and Mike have been saying, oh my God, the sky is going to fall on this. There's no way we're going to keep having babies going into the workforce. It's funny how whenever there's something, a successful...
What's the total fertility rate in the United States? How many contributors to Social Security are there now per worker, per beneficiary?
Fewer than
versus
any time
1935.
Fewer than any time in American history. But so is our productivity is way higher.
It's
way higher.
This is part of the problem, Anthony.
No,
it's like, let's not deal with all of these things that are drivers of debt.
This is 2011
because
all
it's
over
all
again.
going to come. It's all going to come out okay.
No,
in the end, because we're going to keep printing money until our debt becomes so useless that even dumb foreign countries, much less Americans, won't buy it anymore.
Do you know the single most successful program for lifting seniors out of poverty is Social Security? It was about 30% when Social Security was it's in the single digits today. What did that? A government program where we transfer wealth from people who are working to people who are retired. It's worked. I know. And by the way, what will happen when that day comes? Do we have to adjust it? We've had to adjust it 9 times already. We'll adjust it again. Wow. Maybe make people making over $170,000 to start getting taxed on that income for Social Security. Just an idea.
Yeah, it's a bad idea, and it's also the main reason America became richer. People who are retired are among the wealthiest part of American society. They should not be picking the pockets of younger workers who are relatively poor, who have their payroll taxes through the teeth to pay for any of us on this podcast. When we retire, we should not be getting taxpayer subsidies. If you can afford to pay for your retirement, you should do it.
It's the money they put in, though. That's the way the program works.
It is not.
Nick, you're a young man. You're a young man.
Yeah, I'm a young man. I think I'm closer to retirement than you are, sir. And I can tell you right now that there is no tracked account. Like, this is Nick Gillespie. Ever since he fucking cleaned dog shit at a park in Middletown, New Jersey. That money, those payroll taxes are being saved just for you, Nick.
No, that's not the way it works.
It's literally a Ponzi scheme.
Nick, you know better. You know that's not the way it works. I'm paying in now so that retirees can retire without being in poverty. And then the next generation comes and does it for me, like every generation has done it in the golden age. I keep hearing you're a guy. I keep hearing Trump said, make America great again. It's like, okay, we want to go back to when this program was created, was a success and lifted people out of poverty. Look, there's no doubt that we can have arguments over which programs to fund. And I believe that you're on the precipice of revealing the idea that I think Trump and Doge are going to get around to Social Security and Medicare. And then it becomes the question, is Chuck Schumer's strategy right, not to kind of steer the program here? Is he right that just making people pissed off enough at Donald Trump's things that he does, and then we basically wait for the Republicans to lose in a couple of years?
Because we believe in horseshoe theory. If I might just,
Go ahead, Nick. Last word, and then we got to take a break, but we'll rejoin.
Because Trump has been emphatic, and this, that he is not going to touch a penny of Social Security and Medicare, and he means it, because he wants those programs to be protected. And this is a horseshoe theory thing now, where figuring out like where, the Republicans and Democrats, ultimately, they're going to fight over all of these little things. They ultimately agree on spending lots more money and paying for that with debt, not with taxes.
Fair enough. I would just say that Donald Trump believes in anything, and I put in air quotes,
he has emphatically stated that.
What is Donald Trump emphatically saying meant anything to anyone, including this? Whoever talks to him last, it doesn't say, and the same goes for all this Project 25 stuff. I don't believe he knows any of this stuff that's going on. He's just like, fine, go wreak havoc. I don't care. He doesn't have a philosophical governance.
No, he has sometimes a reptilian consistency. He really does like tariffs. And on this one, I'm willing to believe that he sees the wisdom of not touching these popular programs. Doesn't mean he doesn't lie about other things. We're going to take a break for a second. We're going to come back. I perhaps will call an audible, because I've been liking what we are talking about. and I want to follow up on some things. Back in a minute with more Not Even Mad. We're back with Not Even Mad. Our guests are Anthony Weiner and Nick Gillespie. And before we went to the break, and we were going to talk about constitutional crises, and we still can. Before we went to the break, Anthony, you made a point about how the cataclysm of Social Security has always been predicted. And therefore, and I understand this way of thinking, it will never happen. There will never be a cataclysm, or what's really going to happen is an impingement on the amount of money that people have been paying into the system. Yet I disagree with that. I think that it's quite possible, and there's been, history shows, a lot of instances where terrible outcomes have been predicted and hadn't happened until they do. That aside, it's interesting to me because I've always viewed you as a more moderate Democrat and someone who understands economics, but also a good rhetorician. So I did think you moved the debate around a little bit. And what I was talking about was servicing the debt and the trillions, soon to be $1 trillion it will take to service the debt. And this isn't good for anyone. I'm surprised that you also said that a lot of smart people, smarter than us, have said that all we could do is continue printing money. This is the MMT, modern monetary theory. And I think it took a while to be disproved because we were in an era of low interest rates. But now it has more or less been disproved. But if you're still citing it, well, you tell me, do you think that this theory has some credence? Do you think the Democratic Party, does some portion of the Democratic Party or some portion of the mind of every elected Democrat really question whether we can print money and get our way out of the debt?
Well, no, I was making the point in the context of why it's not a resonant issue for citizens to stop their politicians and say, don't provide me with this service. Instead, go ahead and take these resources and put them to a debt retirement. That it's not what I'm suggesting is that for decades, a long time, we've been talking about and hearing about the folly of running up too much debt and how that can ultimately collapse the economy in some way. And I think when not to cite her again, but Mrs. Jones, let's say, says to me, when has that ever happened? Combined with the idea that there's a certain commonsensical thing here, the one thing we know is that the moneyed interests in the economy who protect their own interests pretty well don't really have it in their interest to pull the rug out of this current thing of printing, of giving away money for zero, making 2% on it and getting increasingly wealthy. So I wasn't making the point on some economic theory point. I was making kind of a political point to why Nick is absolutely correct that it's never really been a political issue, or at least it's not today if it ever was.
But I think it should be, and I'm hearing you don't think it should. Like, I understand why it's not a resonant political issue. The Democrats have a theory like yours. Some Republicans might say, no, the debt is real, but then ever asked to pass a tax cut, they always will. Right. And the immediate always takes precedence over the future. But I think that what good leadership should do, and they've done this with many other issues that don't seem like issues, but you could create something as an issue. You can educate the public. You can pull out some statistics, talk about cliffs, brand it as something that they should pay attention to. I think that would be good and necessary civically. I don't know. I mean, just talking to you, not that you stand in for every Democrat. I now am unsure that even half of the political parties in this country agree with me.
Well, let me make it simpler. We recently had a test of this case in stark contrast in 2017, when the largest, most irresponsible tax cut. You heard every Democrat under the sun talking about this is ridiculous how much debt that we're adding. Then during COVID, we add a lot more to the debt, but we were providing support assistance to people who were hungry and didn't have jobs, and we raised people out of poverty,
especially early on.
Right. No, but I'm saying that the poverty, we did something
in surplus. Yeah.
We did something that Democrats not only supported, but I would argue we should still be doing today, which is
wait, why should we be paying people extra money not to work?
No.
Like we were during COVID or whatever. And by the way, Trump signed this. The bills that maximize federal checks going out to people during COVID you want to talk about waste, fraud, and abuse. Everybody agrees that these were rife with bad payments and things like that. You have to pull that back. One of the reasons why you keep a tight budget is so that when you absolutely need to blow out the budget because of some kind of massive, black swan event like COVID, you have the wherewithal to do that. But in the end, what we got was too much money being spent too fast. That was the main cause of inflation. And we've it seems like we're back in a place now. When you look at the Federal Reserve Bank in St. Louis has something called the uncertainty index. And uncertainty is the killer of economic growth. This is one of the big problems with debt, is not only do you have to service it, but it injects a ton of uncertainty into economic planning and it reduces economic growth.
Well, so do the tariffs. I mean, if you want to talk about
no, of course. Well, and also
horrible.
that the fact that the tariffs are like, oh, well, they're on and they're off and they're on and they're off. Uncertainty is a real killer here. But what I'm saying is, like, we shouldn't be spending money as if COVID is still around. Need to go back. After World War II, World War II federal spending jacked through the roof, like in a way that was completely unbelievable. And within 2 years of ending World War II, it was back down to pre-war levels. That's what we should be shooting at here.
SNAP, food stamps, 75% of it goes to kids who are hungry. It hadn't been adjusted for inflation. Okay.
No, that's
we want to talk about the Federal Reserve of St. Louis, but we don't want to talk about hungry kids. And in terms about the abuse of SNAP, when the Inspector General looked at the SNAP program, they found a waste level of 0.1% because it goes for food to children that hadn't been. Let me just finish my thought if I could. Is it so if you believe that the fact that fewer people were hungry as a result of those payments, and the moment we stopped them, more people became hungry, and you can say, hungry kids, Federal Reserve of St. Louis is a more important barometer. No, I don't believe that. Now, you can say a program worked better or worked worse, but when we support poorer families, we reduce the amount of homelessness, we reduce the amount of hunger, and those are good things. When we invest more in Medicare and Medicaid, we get better outcomes. These are the things. Now, you can say we don't want to spend on those things. That's fine. I got news for you, brother. We're going to spend money on healthcare. The only question is, do we spend it wisely or not wisely? When someone gets hit by a bus outside here on Avenue A, we're going to take care of them. The only question is,
how do you pay for that? Do you just keep borrowing, or do you actually fully, if you said to the American people and said, like, okay, we're spending $7.2 trillion. Here's what your portion of the bill is going to be. I'm willing to bet that a lot of people would be like, you know what, this, we don't need that. I don't need that. I don't want that. You talk about SNAP benefits. Hold it, Anthony. When Bush took office in the early 2000s, he came in during a recession, they expanded SNAP benefits and the number of people that could participate in that program. They never reduced the requirements after the recession ended. SNAP benefits shouldn't constantly be growing. More and more people shouldn't be getting them. We're in a full employment economy. The government is not there to solve every problem of every person all of the time.
But hungry kids, yes.
Yeah, hungry kids.
That's what SNAP is.
No, it's not just hungry kids.
75% is hungry kids. And 80% is single parents a month.
Then why does it keep going up? Are people more hungry now?
No,
Are people more hungry now than in 2019? It's the rate of inflation.
Nick, I'm going to tell you something. This is a common misconception. I got news for you. If someone gets hit by that bus on Avenue A right now, and we don't provide any Medicaid for them, let's assume you get your wish and we slash Medicaid.
Why are we talking about Medicaid right now?
Because that's my mouth is moving and I have a thought. The guy gets hit by a bus that's, and we said, well, we're not going to pay for Medicaid. Do you think the bill fairy pays to take care of that guy? Do you think some kind of magical thing? No, it gets unreimbursed care to hospitals and my taxes go up. It's just a matter of how we provide these services. You talked about the garbage collection boy not making a profit. I'm sorry, buddy. That's not a profitable thing. Government does it.
What do you talk about? Garbage collection's not profitable. I grew up in New Jersey. I was born in Brooklyn, but I grew up in New Jersey. And let me tell you, there's a lot of trash hauling companies in New Jersey that make a profit by picking up garbage.
Residential, really? Let me know where that is.
Your entire world is Avenue A, where kids are being knocked over by buses all the time. And
I'm going to make that into an ad. Your entire world is Avenue A.
It is. That's not bad. But that isn't reality. And you can't every time. I mean, it's telling that anytime somebody says, you know what, we should reduce spending, you're like, but there's hungry kids. There's old ladies eating cat food somewhere. Al Gore, to bring back like real memories. This is like from, like ancient history. When he ran for president in 2000, both he and George W. Bush said seniors need to have prescription drugs paid for them because they're so poor. He invoked his mother choosing between eating and getting her prescription drugs. Al Gore's mother, the widow of a senator, the mother of a senator and a best-selling author. This is bullshit. And it turned out that when you look at the amount of money that seniors pay for prescription drugs, on average, it was 1% to 2% of their income in a given year. But both the Republican and the Democratic candidates said we need Medicare prescription drugs Part D because otherwise seniors are hurting. You're buying votes, and you're buying votes on borrowed dollars, and that means you're buying it on the future income of young people.
But who are we
going to have to
paying now?
fucking pay that
Can
bill.
I just say, and I can, because my show, can I just say and just ask if you agree with the vast opinion of economists, and Democrats are the party that yields to expertise, and I think that's why for most of my life I've been a Democrat. They look at especially the second stimulus, the second spending package that Biden passed, the one that would have been bigger if it weren't for the devilish Joe Manchin saying don't cause inflation. Would you agree with most economists that this caused a lot of inflation? And inflation just robs middle class people and it robs poor people. It just makes them poorer in real terms. So the question isn't necessarily, I would say, if you're to frame it fairly, not between a kid eating or a kid not eating, but the median American voter doing better. And that spending has costs because there are always trade-offs. And at this point, I don't see how a fair-minded person could say the trade-offs were worth it. But do you say that, Anthony?
Well, first of all, I dispute the premise. This whole idea that there's consensus on what led to inflation. We had a war. We had COVID. We're seeing all throughout the economy the ramification of this.
But a certain percentage of it, and there's a debate
I don't think
on
a
how
substantial
much was
percentage. I don't think a substantial
more money chasing the same amount or
I know, but
goods, which is inflation.
I mean, that's probably right. It's hard. It's really hard to tell. It was such a weird phenomenon of what wound up happening after COVID. To say that there's consensus is really putting your finger on the scale, Mike. I mean, look, I will say this, that if it contributed to inflation, that it could be. It could be you can say government spending. But I want to tell you this. What also probably contributed to inflation was the fact that we did trillions and trillions of dollars of tax cuts for very wealthy people, and the concentration of wealth going into the economy that are benefiting the very, very well-to-do has never been as stark as it is today. The money is moving increasingly from middle-class families and those struggling to make it into the middle class into the hands of the very wealthy. And if the solution is, well, let's do less with government, well, what is government doing? It's providing health care. It's providing retirement support, and we like a couple of pennies goes to make sure that people in Africa are protected from AIDS. I guess so. I mean, yes, I believe that inflation is a bad thing, and it was a bad thing. But to say that it was because of government spending when we were figuring out how to deal with this sui generis phenomenon of everyone not working for a few months or a year. I'm not really sure.
This stimulus was passed, that was being corrected. And a raft of experts.
How is it that we get to a point where the minute a government program is created or grows a little bit, then we're like, that's the new baseline. We can never go back below that.
That's a fair question.
That's why we went from spending $4.4 trillion in 2019 to $7.2 trillion in this fiscal year.
That's a fair question. And listen, I want to say look, I mean, to some degree, I'm playing my part here. Yeah. I just read that they want to close down the Institute of Peace. When I was in Congress, I worked with Republicans to try to close that place down too. Wool and mohair subsidies. I led the charge to do it. Like I was out there trying to do these things. Well, there you're
all wrong. Mohair is very important to the national, and helium. We need the helium.
But I think, Nick, and I think, and this is a place that I think you and I can agree. I think having a conversation about justifying things from zero rather than justifying what we did last year is totally within the realm of fair. And I think that if Donald Trump and Musk were really doing that in an intellectually honest way, we would really benefit as a country.
Why doesn't Schumer force that conversation? And he can't do it on the floor of the Senate, but then in the bully poll. I mean, for me, and again, I say this as somebody, I end up paying I've never voted for a candidate at any level who has won office, but I always end up paying the bill. I would love to see the Democrats actually start that conversation and force the Republicans to do it.
Would you stop with force? That you don't understand. If you not opened up I was going to say a newspaper, but that would date me. That's not the dynamic that we're in now. The Democrats don't control the House. The Democrats don't control the Senate or the judiciary. The Republicans
How are they going to get control back? How are they going to get control back?
Ding, 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 ding. That's the question. And you're saying, well, let me just finish my thought. You're saying, let's have this conversation about funny. Here's, if I have a critique of Schumer and this decision, and I've tried to give one, I would also say I would have at least spent a little time in my speech, not talking about C's and R's, but saying, okay, the people who are in favor of this, here's what they're going to get. And I'm going to be with this group because here's the other group. Here's the other things that are going to happen if we don't do it. To try to explain this a little bit, we have a little bit of a fire hose now that is very hard for people to figure out what their spots. But if you think there's a appetite in the United States Capitol right now to have some high-minded conversation about zero-based budgeting, that ain't where we are. This is a fire hose of crazy that's going on. And Chuck Schumer and all Democrats are trying to figure out how to manage.
It's so sad. The Democrats were in charge of stuff until recently. And then, I don't know.
Economy did great,
things
pal.
just changed.
Welcome. Welcome to Bidenomics, my man.
Yeah, I know. Bidenomics. That is why Kamala Harris sailed into office, right? Because she inherited a great legacy. But my point is, Anthony, like the passivity on the part of the Democrats. And I say this as, I'm not a Democrat, but we can't have these conversations because it's too crazy.
We're not going to have your conversation. That conversation doesn't animate anybody.
That is deeply, deeply cynical. And Elon Musk and Donald Trump said, we're talking about zero-based budgeting. Schumer could be doing all sorts of stunts in order to make them,
no one cares about zero-based governing, Nick. It's an interesting conversation for you and me and the three remaining podcast listeners who are still tuned into this conversation. Yeah. That's not what's going on there. We have people getting deported. We have people getting
the Tea Party movement, which was extremely consequential, and it cleared out a bunch of dead wood both on the Republican Party and the Democratic Party before it got captured by the Republican establishment. Its whole point was simply stop spending. That was their message. They said taxed enough already. They didn't even say cut taxes. All it was is Nick, we're spending too much. And that was a massive movement.
Nick, so if Donald Trump or Doge or anyone else wanted to have a good faith conversation about the future of government, we would hear them articulating one. And then we'd have something to, now it's just slash and burn. People
again,
being,
this is
people,
your,
let me ask you this about what you think the Democrats should do. And earlier in our conversation, before our break, you did make a reference to maybe Chuck Schumer should sit back, allow Trump to make his mistakes, and then the Democrats could capitalize on that. This is a version of the James Carville, derided in public, but I'm wondering if it was accepted in private, idea of, if you want to express the derided part, you could say do nothing. But I think it was more of a rope-a-dope strategy, which is given that there's nothing the Democrats really can do or will do, which we just saw, just let Trump make mistakes and let the economy suffer, and then people will come and vote for the Democrats. Now, publicly you have to make speeches, publicly you have to bring cases to the courts, which they have been doing, but essentially it's going to be a referendum on Trump and just point out that he's doing poorly. So what do you think of Carville's op-ed and that strategy in general?
Look, I think in 2028, if history is, or 2026 rather, if history is any tell, I mean, the Republicans, they came in unpopular. They're doing unpopular things. They're going to lose seats. And Donald Trump, and this is kind of what Chuck Schumer is falling back on. He says, Chuck Schumer, know one thing, and that's how to win seats. And this is a strategy that helps us win seats more than the other strategy. Not that it's great, but more than the other strategy. But in 2 years or in a year and a half, or whatever it is, Donald Trump can do an enormous amount of damage, particularly if you're going to have like people like renditions going on and people getting swept up in the things like this. You're saying what the strategy, is it a strategy to sit back and do nothing? No, but the net effect is going to be that the things that Donald Trump are doing are not popular. He was not a majority candidate when he got in. He's not one now. He's declining in popularity. These are things that fundamentally people don't support. So where does that leave us? It leaves us with a lot of people who are like the members of the House of Representatives who are criticizing Chuck Schumer and people in the grassroots who say, God damn it, do something. But there are not a lot of levers to do things. And to some degree, the Republicans wanted to give Donald Trump the keys to all. This is the one surprising thing. I am surprised the level to which Republican lawmakers who work really hard to get to that job have completely outsourced their job to Donald Trump. That's the part of this that we've never really contemplated before. There was always an institutional check, even if it was minor, an institutional check that existed. And maybe what has to happen is Chuck Schumer's right, that he has to start hitting those roadblocks of enough Democratic members that are hearing in their districts that it's problematic. Remember, there's only a 1 or 2 seat margin in the House. Maybe that's the thing. But in terms of, is Carville right that Donald Trump will be unpopular in a couple of years? The answer is I agree that will be the case.
Okay, it might not be a strategy to just let Donald Trump ruin the economy. I would articulate the strategy or the tactic as don't do stupid things to get in the way of that bright and shining fact, like paddles at the State of the Union, or maybe even, and it will never be known, maybe even a shutdown. But Nick, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say that, going back to 1992, when Bill Clinton got into office, with the smallest plurality since Richard Nixon. He had like 43% of the vote. He got to do what he wanted for the first 2 years. In 1994, in the midterms, the Democrats got blown out both in the House and the Senate. That was a generational swing. Bush was unpopular, but managed to squeak by until 2006 before losing his House majority. Obama got 2 years of grace where he got to do whatever he wanted, and the Democrats were punished for it. You go to Trump in the first term, the Republicans lose big in the midterms. We have been, and Biden is, it's a similar story. It's mixed, or it's intensified because of COVID. But for the past 20 plus years, we've been in this unfortunate situation where the party in power gets to do what it wants, and then people are like, wow, that is horrible, and they go back the other way. From a pure partisan play, it seems inevitable, that the Democrats will pick up a lot in the midterms, especially because Trump is at the, he's a lame duck already. He's in his last term. But from a serious point of view about building a better America, this is too much, because what are the Democrats going to do? The Democrats don't, they don't seem to be unified on anything. And there is not a clear, there is no clear mechanism or motivation that is shown. What are they going to propose to do, after they take power in the midterms? Is it going to be AOC? Is it going to be some kind of moderate thing? Is it going to be something altogether different? Is it going to be Fetterman? Who is leading that party? Schumer is older than Trump, right? He's done.
Do you
He's
mean
cooked.
by what are they proposed to do? Do you mean who's going
I'm just
to be
saying,
their
what is their
nominee,
governing? What's their governing philosophy? Are they going to somehow come back with like a hyper aggressive youth based socialized, socialist light agenda coming out of like the AOC quarter of things? Is it going to be Gavin Newsom who's going to be like, I've taken California and made it leak people and businesses to places like Texas and Florida? Make me your standard bearer. Is it going to be Fetterman, who seems to be more, pragmatic and more swift? Is it going to be Jared Polis, who's a kind of good government, cut taxes and, and balance the
low
budget?
prices, right? Yeah. Do you know the answer?
I don't know. I want to hear that conversation, because I can tell you this, that libertarians are not particularly small L libertarians who, depending on, the ways that you tally it, they're somewhere between like 5 to 15% of the vote. These are people who want, believe in free minds and free markets, who want like less business, less taxes, or less regulation, less taxes, less government spending. This is a group that's up for grab. There hasn't been an election in our lifetime where if you get most of that vote, you're going to win. I want to see what happens.
Can you articulate a policy platform for your party, Anthony?
Oh yeah, that's what I'm here to do. Yeah, I'm going to do that.
One or two big items?
In fairness, the out party never has that. The out party has primaries to do that, and the out party has has its candidates that run in swing districts that do their own thing. That's what it means to be an out party.
But that's not true, because in the 80s, when the Democrats got kicked a bit into the wilderness, there was the Democratic Leadership Council. that really forged a new identity for the Democratic Party, which Bill Clinton embodied and took to massive success.
He won a primary. No one. There were other candidates.
You're thinking it's not just the person who appears in a presidential year; it's the infrastructure, the ideological and political infrastructure, where you had a bunch of people doing meetings, coming up with this is what we believe.
I think what Anthony's saying is more or less fair. It is true that the out party, the one who just wants to get back in power, it would be very hard for the average Mrs. McConkley Jones to tell you what they would want. Sometimes it's quite apparent, like in the 80s when someone needed to articulate that the era of big government was over from the Democratic side. But it is rarer than not that the out party just wants to get power again to stop the excesses of the in party.
And also, like, successful candidates will decide that. I mean, remember after 2012, I think it was, that they did this whole biopsy, autopsy, that those two words mean the same thing.
That would be great. They should have done a biopsy. Or a vivisection of the Republican
necropsy.
They did whatever it is.
Yeah.
And they said, we figured it out. There are a lot of black and brown people coming into the country. Let's get on that bandwagon. And as a result, they went out and made Donald Trump their next guy. I just don't think.
Who
and by
now
the way,
has gained, by the way, in this election, gained with every minority group. The only place where he didn't gain a percentage of the votes was among whites. So.
Yes, but that was probably not because of what the autopsy.
No, well, that's what's interesting. It's because of what the Democrats did, right? Because once they became the party of wokeness uber alles insane environmental regulation, so nothing can be built and everything is bad. They pushed people to voting for Donald Trump in large numbers.
Pyromaniac in a straw factory. No, okay, let's do one thing at a time. I was making the point that the out party rather, may try to come up with a vision, but the voters have their say, and very often the voters need a candidate in order to articulate that. In terms of what we did wrong, come on, we lost by a point. You can argue anything happened. In terms of these swings, a lot of it was the denominator change. In cities like New York, we had 300,000 fewer Democrats that turned out in 2020, didn't come out in 2024.
Yeah,
Those are the voters I'm talking. Oh, now you're getting into my wheelhouse. These are the voters I'm talking about.
No, but I'm saying it's because they were not enthusiastic about, a brain dead candidate and then a complete cipher.
Wrong.
Right? And an agenda that didn't seem to be doing very well for them.
Getting closer. I'll give you the answer. My view of the case is that we in cities like New York, in states like New York, where we have a Democratic city council, a Democratic mayor, a Democratic governor, a Democratic legislature, a lot of the policy failures that we've had here on things that are far removed from what goes on in Washington, a legalized marijuana program that went haywire, requiring scaffoldings to be up all over our streets, the fact that when you get into the subways and pay $2.90, 3 people jump in behind you and don't pay. Fundamentally, Democrats who believe in fairness and believe in that we should be the place that solves problems, we are not doing it particularly well. It has very little to do with the referendum on Trump and Harris. They just have a sense of ennui kind of that's going on. That's my theory of what's going on in urban areas. These are not Trump voters. They have not become Trump voters. However, by staying home, they're letting us know that in places like New York, they're dissatisfied. But all of that being said, it does not change the fact that we are going to have a debate like the one you described, Nick, where there's going to be some version of do more of this and more of that. Yeah, there's going to be a lot of that. I'm a little bit over the woke thing. Frankly, Democrats have not been talking about woke
America, I think.
What is that?
A little over the woke thing.
Mike, do you know why they're over it? Because people like Nick and the Republicans won't shut up about it, and we're not talking about it. You guys are just taking the most discreet minority group and kicking the shit out of them. Like, why do you keep talking about them? No, they're doing it, and I think it's kind of disgusting, to be honest.
You're trying to talk about, for instance, trans girls playing sports? I think it's a popular
right.
issue.
No Democrat ever campaigned on that.
Well, it doesn't
Who's
matter.
running ads on that? The Republicans.
That's the policy they're associated with.
No, they're associated because the Republicans are running ads saying that.
Well, they're talking about it nonstop. To correctly point out that is
Anthony,
the
you're
Democrat
happy.
stance.
Wait, hold on a second, Mike, hold on a second.
Yeah.
When this woke thing started, by the way, the candidate of woke, that Ron DeSantis, got beaten like a rented mule. When this thing started out, it was about taking...
still governor? Is he still governor of Florida?
No, he got beaten like a rented mule, even within the Republican primary.
Yeah, no, but that's
within the
not
subset
the point.
that he should be making the most hay as woke. He's not doing it. So he stands up and says, look at that school over there. Look at that person over there. Look at that ostracized person over there. And ever since then, the idea... Being a demagogue is the easiest political game in the book. Making fun of the tiny, discrete minority is super easy, but Democrats are not campaigning on it. And to misunderstand that, they're demagoguing on it. Did we do a good job responding to the demagoguery? No, but that's what you have me on for.
Okay, I think that the easiest thing to do is to take the 80 side of an 80-20 issue and to point out that your opponents are on the other side.
Perfect.
Even if it's
Perfect. That's what some people choose to do in public life. They say, you're going to kick the shit out of a discrete minority. I'm going to get out of the way. Some people say, you know what? I don't like bullies. And we stand up to bullies in the Democratic Party.
Distinct issue of trans girls in sports, not overall where it's like a 56-44 and
Mike,
trans women
people,
in the military is popular. The American public are more.
Mike, you're trying to slice this issue too finely. When it comes down to
most voters look at stances that they view as crazy.
I don't care what most voters
okay, then why don't you...
You were making the argument, and I want to make sure my point is clear. You were making the argument that Democrats have to stop being the party of woke. It's Republicans took a discrete issue and they tried to hang it on Democrats' neck. And if you want to say, oh, they did it successfully, or the people like Anthony Weiner,
because it was delusional cases.
Anthony, what you know, what do you say about the fact that, you know, New York State it's a Democratic stronghold, right?
Oh, this is the last thing I wanted to get at, which is this.
And it's not going well for most people.
Yes.
Here.
So this touches on a lot of things.
Is that the Republicans' fault too?
About.
Have the Republicans faked people out?
No, you just heard my whole rap about this.
Wait,
Do you pay attention? I just did this whole rap about why Democrats are displeased. Why Democratic primary voters are displeased.
This is So this is what I wanted to take. That very idea. It touches on a lot of things we've been talking about. One, Nick saying, what's the big Democrat agenda? Two, the theory that there are too many actors in public life who have access to the breaks, something that you, Anthony, was saying, which echoes the political scientist Juan Lin's. The American system has too many people who could say no, and you were talking about that with Republicans in Congress. Well, there is this idea, and I had Mark Dunkelman on and Ezra Klein.
He used to work for me, Mark Dunkelman.
Did he?
He was my legislative director.
Interesting. Love that guy.
He's great.
And now Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson are out with a book. And what they're saying is what could be the big Democrat idea, but also what right now is the Democrat deficiency is that because there are too many people with access to the breaks, progress can't happen. And when you look at the Democrat-run places like New York City, it is a bad, or California, it is a bad advertisement to Democrats. How good an agenda item and a critique is that, would you say?
I think it's all very fair. By the way, it's Democratic cities. I don't know why we stopped dropping the last letters of this thing. It's not the Republican Party. It's the Democratic Party. Listen, here's my case, and I agree with you, and I think maybe Nick and I are going to conclude by agreeing on this stuff. Here's what has happened within Democratic politics and within Republican politics, but the purpose of New York City, let's focus on Democrats. That right now, if there's a problem to be solved, take one. There are too many people who live on our streets who are mentally unwell. Okay, they can't take care of themselves. Within Democratic politics, we are trained nowadays to just go to a place and figure out where the interest groups are. And if our interest groups are over there, let's say the ACLU says that homeless person has a right to be on the street, our primaries encourage everyone to be in that spot. Instead, the way New Yorkers, the way Americans, the way human beings think is, how do we solve that problem? How do we get that person off the street? How do we provide them with care? How do we get our public spaces back? And I think that what's wound up happening is because we are in this environment where there is no friction between the parties, we figured out let's not have any friction even within our own party. And that's why we're not producing ideas anymore. There's too much in New York City, people getting elected. I'm going to be the values person. I'm running a race that's very different. I've got these very specific things that I'm arguing that we should do to try to solve problems. And if people get pissed off about it, I say, all right, what are your ideas? Now, is that a function of being a one-party town? I kind of think that it is, but I also think it's a function of a larger problem. We have become a country of two one-element parties, that there is zero friction in the Republican Party. It's Trump or nothing. And in the Democratic Party, we're quickly becoming the anti-Trump or we're nothing. And I am trying to argue in this race that I'm having here in very progressive, very liberal East Village that, you know what? Hiring police officers, it leads us to a progressive value, which is we're safe. Stopping people from jumping the turnstile leads us to a progressive value of fairness.
Taking that homeless person off the street because they're not well enough to take care of themselves is a progressive value, getting back our public spaces. That's where people like Dunkelman and I are trying to make an argument that, yes, to some degree, if we don't solve these problems, we don't deserve to win.
Mike, if I can follow up, and definite partial agreement, both with Anthony and certainly with you. I listened to the Dunkelman interview because I'm interested in these issues, and I'm very familiar with the abundance agenda, which is something that Reason has been promoting since 1968. You let people build things. You let people create the worlds that they want to live in, and stuff gets better because we learn from each other's successes or failures. The Democrats now at a kind of national level and at a state level, they have to look, the four most populous states in the country are California, Texas, Florida, and New York. Two are totally Democratic and two are mostly Republican. And the mostly Republican ones are the destinations. Texas is becoming the new California, which became the new New York. What they do is they let people build stuff. They have a horizon and they say, fill it out with all the different villages you want to live in. It's not perfect. They tax less, they regulate less, and they spend less on government. And then, and they let people figure out how things work. I would love to see something like that in New York, not simply about homeless people, because there are serious issues there about, taking people in involuntarily, but a lot of the other stuff I'm in agreement with. It is impossible to develop market housing in New York. It's so hard. My wife has a small creative agency. Her accountant told her if she just moved across the river to New Jersey, she would pay $8,000 less in taxes.
Yeah, but she lives in New Jersey then.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, Mr. Queens, right? It's no, but this is a big problem because New Jersey is one of the highest tax states in the country, along with New York and Connecticut and California. Bringing a sense of possibility to politics, that means getting out of the way. And if New York State, which spends on average over $30,000 a year per K through 12 student, has terrible reading and math scores, increase the possibility for school choice or for some kind of actual reform rather than being in the pocket of traditional Democratic constituencies, that would be a game changer. But I don't see it happening in the National Democratic Party because nobody's talking about these things.
All right. Let us end the show, as we do, as is our tradition, with that little annoyance. And part of the rules is it can't be the preceding hour and 10 minutes. I think we actually got along deep down, and much of this was performative, and also there was an excellent exchange of ideas. But we call these things our goat grinders because they are the things that grind your gears or get your goat. I don't know, Nick, you got one?
Goat grinders. Yeah. Well, I have a bunch, and I was going to talk a lot about the new found belief that, if we could only get seed oils out of everything, we would be a great country again. They don't have seed oils in Putin's Russia or Orban's Hungary or something like that. That drives me nuts. It's insane and it's totally unfounded anyway. Go try to find the studies that show that seed oils are what's making America fat, stupid, and lazy. But, Mike, particularly for you, the goat grinder that I wanted to talk about was the veneration of Walter Cronkite, because I know that he is something of a hero to you, or at least a touchstone. And you and I, in our conversation, when you were on my podcast, we talked about this a little bit, but and
then you recommended a book which debunked it, and I went out and bought that book.
And it's a phenomenal book by Joseph W. Campbell. Yes. And, I just want to point out, among other things, when Walter Cronkite is always referenced as the most trusted man in America, and Campbell did this great debunking of that, where it comes from a 1972 poll of about 9,000 people in 18 states, where it was a bunch of political figures like Hubert Humphrey, Richard Nixon, Spiro Agnew, Ted Kennedy, Ed Muskie. And then for some reason, Walter Cronkite was on that. And it's like, who do you trust the most? And he eked out a slight victory because 72% of people said he was trustworthy. And then CBS News started promoting him as the most trusted man in America. And then people just start picking that up. And the same thing with the idea that he's the guy who made LBJ give up, realized that he had lost America because of Cronkite's special from Vietnam. It's just not true. And for me, that's a shorthand for so many kind of benchmarks or touchstones that people genuflect towards or gesture towards. Always check them out, because I would say like half the time, if not more, they're not just a little bit wrong, they're completely wrong. And that's a great way to become that guy at a party.
Man, when Walter Cronkite has lost Nick Gillespie, he's lost America.
That's right.
Anthony, do you have a goat grinder?
Well, when Walter Cronkite gets your goat 30 years after his death, whatever it is, you got to get out more, man. Come on, man. I might have misunderstood the assignment, but now that it's March Madness and sports is and baseball season's opening soon, and the NHL is finally reaching the relevant part of its season. My goat is what does goat stand for anyway? Or get my goat.
Get your goat.
Mine is this notion that announcers always do and commentators always do is he didn't want it enough, or they had one guy gave more effort than the other guy, and that's why the curveball didn't break, or that's why that play broke down. Like this, and it does kind of to me reflect a little bit, and maybe it's because I'm in recovery. Like we talk about this a lot. None of us does any of this stuff alone. Like there's so many things that happen in the course of a sporting event or in the course of our lives, and it does kind of bleed over into our daily lives. This exaggerated notion that if we just want something really bad, that you can make it happen. And believe me, these guys playing sporting events, they really want it. I really want my life to have been different. People can want it, but the idea that if you just will something enough, and maybe it's, it goes into the notion that we become less and less of people that believe in a higher power. I don't know what it is, but it does kind of get my goat when I hear a bunch of 19-year-olds who are playing their heart out, someone to say when they're doing a wrap-up of a play or the wrap-up of something went wrong, he didn't want it enough. That really does get my goat. I'm pretty sure that people playing sporting events, they want it, and I'm pretty sure that people who are struggling, it's not because they want to struggle, it's because, that none of us is able to do this alone. And I know that you, Mike, could not do this program without people like Nick. So
I feel like you're speaking like a Mets fan. You got to believe, but sometimes that just ain't enough.
That's exactly.
Although I was at a press conference once after a game where Tom Glavine was like, "Yeah, it's okay. I still love my kids," and that is not what people wanted him to hear. I
totally get that ethos. And don't get me wrong. There are sometimes I watch people, particularly during the interminable regular season that all these sports except for football has, that you do kind of get the sense, when you do see, Mike, you're a sports guy. Nick, I don't know if you are. When you see how dramatically different playoff basketball and NCAA tournament basketball and playoff hockey, baseball's a little different because you don't kind of see the intensity quite in the same way. But man, imagine if they played like this. So I'm not saying that there are not times that they're maybe taking a shift off, but this whole idea that announcers say, "Oh, the reason why that curveball didn't break is he didn't want it enough," I'm not buying it.
Well, I'll tell you someone in the world of sports who definitely wants it, and that's West Virginia Governor Patrick Morrisey. Wanted the Mountaineers to be in the NCAA tournament, but they were not invited. And yeah, they probably should have been. North Carolina didn't have as good a quote-unquote resume, although they're going to now trounce. They've already beaten San Diego State, and they might trounce their next opponent. However, I just want to point out, if you've heard any of this, and maybe you have because it crossed into the political realm, and the West Virginia governor is now launching an investigation because everyone has to just behave as big and as an ass as they possibly can during this current era. But West Virginia's record was 19-13. They lost 13 games, and I'm sure many of their opponents, I don't know, maybe some of them wanted it more than they did, but they had 13 chances to only lose 12 games. If they had lost 12 games, they'd be in, and we'd be debating some other team who lost way too many games to be given or anointed as the 67th best team in America. If there's anything that gets my goat, it's grousing about not being invited to a tournament based on a subjective standard when you've had 32 chances to win and you've won 19 of them, but you could have won 20.
I don't buy it, Mike. You love it. You love being outraged by the outrage. It's part of what makes the cycle go around.
But do you, Mike, also get annoyed with the NCAA when, the same people show up even when they're on the bubble? Like, shouldn't teams like North Carolina, or just be automatically dismissed if they're not ranked in the top 10.
Yeah,
they should just be kicked out and give somebody
the
new.
Opposite. All these kids are getting paid. The West Virginia kids were getting paid hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yeah,
they could have. These are not, even though they're and the money goes very far in West Virginia.
There, yeah.
I think that what the tournament should do is say, what would be the most interesting and entertaining affair we could put on television? And the inclusion of North Carolina is definitely one.
Well,
of
Mike,
them.
let me tell you. I know you like to. You're going to want the last word. Let me just say this. I like any remaining subjectivity into sports. I like umpires that get calls wrong. I like drafts that are screwed up. I like that kind of stuff, because increasingly we want to have error-free, scot-free things, and that's the fun of sports, is arguing about those types of things.
Yeah, I agree with you. The worst thing about March Madness is excessive videography, because we have to get every out-of-bounds play right, and then they see if it went off the finger or the fingernail, thus grinding. Remember, I said that being entertaining is a high priority for watching a sporting event. They sap the entertainment out of it, and it's this pursuit of perfection that will never be achieved. We, however, on this show, I think have come close to the platonic ideal of two guys hashing it out with a third guy sitting there often. But I want to thank my guests, Anthony Weiner and Nick Gillespie. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
And until next time, we are not
Nick.
saying we're right. We're not saying you're right, but we're definitely saying we're not even mad.